Hello, I'm James Avery. Welcome to the History Makers Talking Truth, a series featuring inspirational stories and words of wisdom from famous African Americans. What you're about to hear are extraordinary stories from members of our community who've made it despite all odds. These are true stories about faith, faith in God, a divine presence, and faith in ourselves. We hope these stories will inspire you to go after your dreams, to reach your highest goals, and to have faith, no matter what.
God gives us what we need to understand that God is alive inside of us. God gives us the experiences we need to come home, to find our way home. My life had fallen apart. I was working at Essence, making that $500 a month. My marriage had fallen apart. It was the low point. I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, how I was going to feed my daughter Shauna. I didn't know how I was going to make it through the night. I was so anxious that the anxiety turned into a physical pain. I was having difficulty breathing all week, and by the time Sunday rolled around, I thought I was having a heart attack. I called my husband to come to my house that Sunday morning to pick up my daughter and take me to the hospital. And I sat in the emergency room, as people do when they don't have money to go to a private physician. I was examined. The doctor told me I wasn't having a heart attack, but an anxiety attack, and that I needed to slow down. I remember saying, how can I slow down when the earth is moving beneath my feet? So I left the hospital and I started walking up Broadway, and I looked up. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I saw a marquee outside that read United Palace, church service 3 p.m. A force pulled me into that church. I sat in the back of that church and I heard a sermon preached by a Reverend Alfred Miller. But it changed my life. He said that with your mind you control your world, and that anything you believe about yourself is true. He said God is not far away from you. God is within you. God is alive in you. He said it again and again. God is alive in you. I had passed that church many a Sunday, had driven past. If I hadn't had the physical challenge, I wouldn't have been on that side of town. I would have passed that church as I had many a Sunday. So all of those things had to be in place, I came to realize, in order for me to hear that message. I gathered up all the pamphlets in that church, and I walked home that day. And as I was walking across, I guess, the McCombs Dam Bridge that leads from Harlem to the Bronx, I just kept saying what the minister said, God is alive in me. But I said it with a question mark at the end. God is alive in me? I'm going to discipline my mind to behave as though that is true, because I have nothing to lose. I started to count my blessings. Okay, I don't have money. That's all I was focused on, what I didn't have. And that sermon helped me to look at what I did have. Oh, I was healthy, and my daughter was healthy, and I did have a roof, and I did have a job. You know, and I could use my talents and skills to do something else. And I asked the divinity, what should I do? I asked the inner core of me, teach. Going down to Ophelia DeVore's modeling school and teach the models how to apply makeup and fix their hair. Apply for the job and got it. My attitude changed. The next thing I knew, Marsha Gillespie was asking me to become the fashion editor. Our lives began to change. I've always come back to that message. I come back to it every day. It's the truth that I'm still trying to understand and live. God is alive in me. God is alive in us. There is nothing to fear. Believe in something that you can't see. the peace that you can't see is more powerful than anything in the physical world. And that's what I've dedicated my life to, trying to understand and to articulating to our people.
Susan Taylor was eventually promoted to editor-in-chief at Essence magazine. While holding that position, she increased readership to millions and inspired women worldwide through her monthly column, In the Spirit. Today, she continues to inspire and encourage others through her leadership at Essence Communications, her books, public speaking engagements, and charity work.
I want to be remembered as a person who didn't waste her time here and just used whatever the gifts are that God has given me to make life better for people who are struggling needlessly along the margins. That's the legacy that I'm leaving. That's what I'm working toward.
I didn't come from a negative family. If a white kid called me the N-word, I would say to my grandfather what they'd call me, and he would say, "Ann, is that your name?" And that was the end of it. Or sometimes he would say, "Isn't it sad that that kid will never know what a wonderful, bright person you are?" And then he'd start on another conversation. I don't deal in negatives today. I really don't worry about what people say about me or the criticism. I could care less. I am on this earth to be all that I can be. My prayer here every morning all the way to this school is, God, help me to fulfill the destiny, the place that you meant for me to be. Help me to do the things that you put me on this earth to do. I believe we were all sent here to do certain things. I think we don't do them because we follow our own wheels. I told the kids, God's trying to talk to us and show us success, but we're so busy with the TV and the facts and the this and the that, so God can never catch you home. You know, He can never get your attention.
Marva Collins' core belief in God and her positive attitude has served her well. As one of America's most famous educators, Collins began working in the Chicago school system, setting high academic standards for poor, primarily black inner-city students. Her results attracted national attention. In 1975, she started what is now called the Marva Collins Preparatory School. She continues to work as an educator and advocate for children.
I live by a verse from Victor Hugo that I repeat constantly. Give me patience for the small things of life. Give me courage for the great troubles of life. Help me to do my work and go to sleep knowing that God is awake. My challenge is a child that no one believes can succeed, that no one wants to be bothered with. They get on your last nerve. You have to go out and say a prayer sometimes because you want to choke them real slowly, but it's momentary. Because I come right back again. I'll say to a child in my moment of frustration, I don't care what you do, just do whatever you'd like. And then 5 minutes later, I say, I changed my mind. You're gonna learn or you're gonna die, now take your choice. But it's a passion for me to see people succeed. It's a real, to share that passion with other people. You know, that you really can achieve whatever you'd like to achieve.
I was born on a Sunday, June 7th, that Sunday, 1931. So on the 10th, my father walked me into the church in the little chapel, Hunt's Chapel, and he offered me up to God and gave me a name. He said I would always be blessed because he had given me to God. I can remember the paternal grandmother, Grandma Han, as we call her. My father took me fishing with him one day up in the mountains on the Broad River, and he stopped by the house where she was living. And she looked at me and she turned my hands over and looked at them. And she turned to my father and she said, "This boy is not going to be a farmer. Send him to school." She says, "He does not have the hands of a farmer." And so I guess my father kind of rallied in that concept, because whereas my sisters would stay at home, chop the cotton, pick the cotton, he would send me to school.
That decision made all the difference in the world. After graduating from high school in the mountains of North Carolina, David Driskell went to Howard University.
I go to Howard, present myself, and say, I'm here to go to college. And they looked at me like I came from Mars, and they said, you don't just come to college, you make an application. I said, well, I'm here, give me one. And I had my report card, and I'm salutatorian, and like, how dare you not admit me? And they said, well, school has been going on for 3 weeks. You can't just come to college like that. And I worried those people sick. I went up there every day, and they finally just let me sit in on the classes. And I wrote home and said, I'm in college now.
David Driskell was officially enrolled that January.
Well, I really wasn't well prepared, but I was able to hang in there. I didn't write well. I hadn't had all the math I should have. And there was a gentleman who took me, one of the counselors, who took me under his wings, Dr. Lawrence, I will never forget. And he built up my self-esteem by encouraging me.
David Driskell's life was truly blessed. His time at Howard University was the beginning of a life dedicated to scholarship. Today, he is considered one of the world's leading authorities on African American art. He earned his master's degree from Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and pursued postgraduate studies in Europe. Driskell is an artist in his own right and has taught at universities worldwide.
I think in so many ways, I am inheriting whatever that blessing was that my dad used to hold me up and offer me up not only to God but to the world. And I don't think that I can, as long as I have breath, move in any other direction, because that too was a mandate to go forth and do good and to help make this a better world.
My pastor was the one that made me want to be a musician, Reverend Al Sharpton. He was the guy that played the guitar so good till I knew if I had a message I wanted to get to God, just tell him. But you know, Isaac, it's sort of funny. All of my life, I never felt like that again until about 8 or 9 years ago. I met the Pope. I went to the Vatican and met the Pope, and that's the second time in my life that I felt like if I had a message, I could, get it over.
Send it up there. That's
So,
right.
and the funny thing, I must tell you, then I'll shut up. I gave the Pope a guitar. You know, he can play.
The Pope can play guitar?
People laughing, but the Pope played guitar before he became the Pope.
Wow.
But anyway, after I gave him the guitar and we were leaving, my band was with me, and they say, do you hear that? I said, what? The Pope is playing The Thrill Is Gone. They were lying, of course. Yeah, but he can play, though.
B.B. King has been called one of the world's greatest blues guitar players, and it was his pastor that made him want to be a musician. He has recorded hit after hit, including The Thrill Is Gone, Let the Good Times Roll, When Love Comes to Town, and many, many others. To date, his honors include nearly a dozen Grammys, 27 Downbeat Awards, and 4 honorary doctorate degrees.
I remember reading once where the great entrepreneur, Ford, of the Ford company, automobile company, he said if he went broke and if he could borrow $1 from each of his employees, he would still be a millionaire. So I believe today that if I could borrow $50 from all of my friends, I could become a millionaire too.
Wow. That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot, dude.
My father was not a fan of organized religion. I never saw him go to bed at night without getting on his knees to pray. But he did not belong to a church, to an organized church, and seemingly he'd had some experience. And he made a statement one day which, if you're going to preach, be sure that you want to live the life that a preacher ought to live. And in other words, it sort of changed my viewpoint for a while. And so I did not follow. My first inclination, I think, was to go into the ministry. In December, Pearl Harbor came. Then things really opened up, but I was already in college. And I stayed in college till 43. And in August of 43, I was drafted.
After training, he was sent overseas to fight in Italy.
Now, Italy was a desperately poor country during World War II, so there wasn't much to buy, but they did have bars where they sold wine, and they had a lot of wine. White soldiers tried to enforce segregation by saying to the owners, if you let black soldiers in here, then white soldiers won't come. But it never was able to take effect like they wanted to.
The war finally ended in Europe, but it was far from over in the Pacific.
So all of these divisions over in Europe were waiting to go to Japan for that last onslaught, in which we thought that thousands of people would be killed. I didn't look to get back, because I'd read about how desperate the Japanese were and how much they fought and how much they were willing to die to protect their homeland. And I believed that they were willing to, put forward an effort that would result in the death of many of them and many of us. It was then, as I met the white soldiers from their outfits, that it dawned on me that most of us were going to be a little bit different when we got back home. That even the white soldiers recognized that the kind of segregation they had known was not going to always be.
Japan surrendered before Benjamin Hooks and his fellow soldiers in Europe were needed.
12 million men and women who went to the service came back different people. Then the GI Bill of Rights, the most phenomenally successful affirmative action program the world has ever known. They said to me, Ben Hooks, we took 3 years of your life. Took you from your family, your school, sent you to the Army. Therefore, we're going to give you money to attend college, give you a monthly stipend, give you cheap insurance rates, let you buy a house, all of that. That's an affirmative action program. And the same people who enjoyed the GI Bill of Rights fought against affirmative action for black people. Well, if they owe me something for taking 3 years of my life as a soldier, what about all those years they took because I was then and am now black?
With the GI Bill in hand, Hooks, the war veteran, went straight to law school. But he soon found himself struggling with speaking in public.
Somewhere in the last years of law school, I began to wonder why in the name of God was I in law school when I couldn't talk to 10 people. And one day, a man, Reverend Gladden, asked me to speak at his church, and I agreed. And I wrote my little speech, and I wondered who was I writing it for, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to deliver that speech. That Sunday morning when Reverend Gladden presented me and I had my little notes, I stood up to speak, and I never had a problem, and haven't had one since. And I was delivered from my bondage of fear of public speaking, and since that time, I've spoken to audiences more than 100,000 at one time. In other words, I was delivered that Sunday morning, and that I call a miracle. I moved more and more toward the call to the ministry. And finally, in 1956, I told my pastor that I felt I'd been called to preach.
Reverend Benjamin Hooks became a successful lawyer in Memphis, Tennessee, and was a leader in several civil rights organizations, including the Southern Christian Leadership Council. In 1972, he was appointed to the Federal Communications Commission and was the first black FCC commissioner. From 1977 to 1992, he served as executive director of the NAACP. Today, he continues to serve God and work for racial equality and justice.
You had men and women who sat down and agonized and paid a price, who studied, strategized, tried to look through the future. How can we bring about change that would be meaningful and lasting? And I thank God that I was a part of that cadre of people who helped implement and make that change lasting.
In this amazing world of ours, sometimes mysterious or divine things happen that we can't explain. It may be easy for some of us to shrug them off, but for the rest of us, it's evidence that something larger than ourselves is out there. Our ancestors knew this, but no matter what your beliefs, there's no denying that these events can have a profound effect on our lives. Listen to this story told by Ruby Dee to Angela Davis.
That was a strange time because when I met Ozzie and Jeb, I mean, I really didn't like him. I thought he was a very peculiar looking person. You know, he was about as big as a string bean, and and he had this Adam's apple that sort of stuck out. You know, he was strictly from the country. This tall guy. You know, with sleeves that on his shirts that came in the middle of his arm, and the pants came nowhere near his ankles, you know. And he was this tall, skinny man dressed, in the well-worn apparel of a short, fat man, And his understudy and I used to sit in the theater and we would talk about him. And we would say, well, where did he get his clothes? But I do remember one day, and you can stop me. He was on stage. He played the part of a returning soldier, and in the play Jeb by Robert Audrey. And at one point, he stood on the tie, slowly, deliberately tying his tie in his soldier's uniform. And I remember sitting in the audience and looking up at him, and something very peculiar happened, because I hadn't been thinking about him in any particular way, and I had no romantic notions about him. But as I watched him, I felt something like a bolt of lightning. An electrical charge, flashed between us. And I was so shocked. I never felt anything like that before. I thought that was such a corny thing for me to be feeling. It was so strange because I really didn't even like him. I do remember that sometime later, I told him about this strange sensation I had as he was working. And because I was curious to know if he felt anything. I mean, it was such a powerful thing, And he says, no, Ruby, I didn't feel a thing. And I was shocked. but we married anyway,
Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis have been married for over 50 years. Both have appeared in countless plays, movies, and television shows. Miss Dee was the first African-American woman to play lead roles at the American Shakespeare Festival and has won an Emmy, an Obie, and many other awards, including the National Medal of Arts. She's also the author of books, plays, poems, and children's stories.
I think most people, what they do in their life, it's just meant to be. And you just have to flow with it like the river. Just flow with that. It's not being beat around, kicked around, and all that kind of stuff, but understanding and standing up for what you believe in. I think my father felt that I was a special child, and he nurtured me a little bit the best he could. Many people do that today. Tiger Woods' dad, Venus Williams, Michael Jordan, a lot of athletes, men and women, their parents, their fathers, nurture them to be whatever they're doing. That's what they want them to be. When I was drafted to go in the Army, my dad felt that I shouldn't go into the Army. He took me to a psychic, a voodoo. I didn't even ask him what. He drove me to Palestine, Texas. That's a good name for a city. To this lady, and she sit and talk to him. So your son is a very special child. She said, well, he's going in the Army. And she said, he's not going in the Army. He's going to play baseball like you want him to play baseball. And he's going to be successful. I did go in the Army. I hurt my knee as soon as I went in the Army, and I spent most of the Army life in the hospital in Texas. I got out of the hospital. I went back to my unit, and then we went to Germany. My knee got a problem again. I went in the hospital there. And then when I got out, they were going around asking who played baseball in the unit. And that's where my life began. And the Cubs scouted me. I came to the Cubs in '53. And they chose me to go to the major leagues. So when I came, I was just, really surprised. I called my dad and said, gosh, Dad, going to the major leagues. You are? We are rich. Most people say that. We're going to be rich. And he laughed, yeah. He just said, yeah, right. But he didn't get excited about it at all.
Ernie Banks became the most popular player in Chicago Cubs history, earning the National League's Most Valuable Player Award in 1958 and 1959. After 18 seasons with the Cubs, he retired, having hit 512 home runs. In 1977, he was elected to baseball's Hall of Fame.
I feel that everything is a miracle. I mean, that my life is in divine order. I can't point it out. It's like a miracle, all the things that happened in my life.
Do you have a favorite phrase or saying?
Well, I have a couple, maybe, Ibe, which means it'll get better. I chant that a lot in the morning, and I give it to a lot of students so they can also chant it or say it, because in that way, when you say things, you can make it better. When I first got out of school, I answered an ad in the New York Times, and they asked me to send an example of my writing, and I did. I got a telegram on a Saturday to report to work on Monday. At 9 o'clock, I was hired. And so I went around the house showing this to my father. See. I mean, he halfway knew that I like to write, I can't get a job as a writer. I jumped up and down. I showed that telegram to everybody and their mama. I was so excited. I was like, whoa, look at this, look at this. And I went out on a Monday morning, and I was all of 20 years of age, right? I got downtown at 8:30 instead of 9 o'clock, and I'm standing outside waiting. And up comes this woman who evidently is the secretary, receptionist. I showed the telegram. She looked at me. She opened the door. I went in. And so about 10 or 5 minutes to 9, the guy came in and said, I'm so sorry, the job is taken. So I said, well, no. I showed him the telegram. I said, look, it's not 9 o'clock. I said, I was supposed to report at 9 o'clock. Should I go out and report at 9 o'clock? Then I'll be okay. I just came at 8:30, right? And the guy they looked at it. He looked at me, handed it back, said, the job is taken. You do not have a job, so you should just leave. And I said, oh, I got it. It's discrimination. You're discriminating against me because, I'm black. And the guy looked at me. I started to cry, and I remember it said, I am going to report them to the Urban League, because the Urban League will do something about this, right? And I got on the train.
That train in New York led Sonia Sanchez right to an unexpected place.
I got off 135th Street, and I passed this building. And lo and behold, it said Schaumburg Library. And I went inside there, and I said to a guard who was standing outside smoking, I said, what kind of library is this? He said, lady, go inside. Just sign the book, go inside. The woman inside would tell you. Miss Hudson's her name. So I walked inside, and the woman said, yes, dear, can I help you? And I said, what kind of library is this, the Schaumburg? She said, this library is called the Schaumburg. It has books in here only by and about black folks. And then I said with my smart-ass self, I said, there must not be many books in here then. She told me to sit down, and she would bring me some books, and she brought me Souls of Black Folk, Up from Slavery, and Their Eyes Were Watching God. And she put Their Eyes Were Watching God on top, and she said, here, dear, now you read these and be quiet. And I started reading Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I was so stricken by the beauty of that book. I eased out of my chair, and I went and knocked on the door, and I said to her, what's your name again? She said, Miss Hudson, dear. I said, Miss Hudson, how could I be an educated woman here in New York City and not have read this book? She said, yes, dear, I know. That's why we're here now. Go back and read some more.
Something led Sonia Sanchez to that library in Harlem, and that experience opened a whole new world for her. She was deeply inspired by the works of African-American writers and would become an award-winning poet. She continues to write poetry, but also teaches and is the author of plays and children's books.
And every morning I get up and I look in the mirror and I chant, eBay, eBay, yeah, 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 it'll get better. And then I smiled and said, of course, if you work to make it better, Sonia, it will get better. And that's what we have to do.
Life is made up of many turning points, and sometimes all it takes is one good person to help you make that right turn. In fact, you don't have to wait for someone to show you the way. You can be that person for someone else. You're about to see how lives were changed just because someone stepped in and cared.
I was 9.5. I was told that my father had an ancestral relationship with my sister, and they bore a child together, which tore the family up. My parents separated. We had to deal with the shame of that. My father abandoned us. We lived in the 10-room house in Queens he had bought. After a while, couldn't pay the bills, so finally we lived for months with no lights, no gas, no transportation, until my mother just finally had to abandon it and move to the projects in Brooklyn and go on welfare. So it was very traumatic in terms of not only the public shame, but the readjusting to a different lifestyle, the leaving of your friends and loved ones, just being totally uprooted and put in a total different, hostile environment almost overnight.
Often in our darkest hour, a person is placed in our lives just when we need them. For Reverend Al Sharpton, that person was Bishop F.D. Washington.
Bishop Washington used to read a lot. I used to sit in his office after services and he'd just read and underline passages in a book. And I remember developing that habit even before I could read well. I used to sit with a book and just underline, trying to look like Bishop Washington. I think he, in his own way, thought I would grow up and probably inherit the church, or at least a church. So he saw a combination of himself, a protege, a student, and he was very encouraging. He became my surrogate father for my early years. Bishop Washington believed in giving people his best, even when I've seen him sick in pain. He taught me that people came to you to be ministered to, and it's not fair to let your own personal feelings, shortcomings, crisis situation interfere with you providing for them what they need.
The advice and spiritual guidance Reverend Sharpton received during those early years would provide him with a strong spiritual foundation. It's a foundation he would draw on years later in 1991. Bensonhurst, New York was the scene of a murder where white teens shot and killed a black teenager named Yusef Hawkins. For months, marchers protested, and it was during one such rally that Al Sharpton was stabbed 2 inches from his heart.
He had one stab wound underneath his left clavicle. The entrance wound was quite small. According to the police on the scene, this was more likely a stab wound done in an upward direction. The instrument that was used was relatively long, about 3.5 inches, stiletto.
All your life you talk about you'll die for a cause. You never really, really know till you're laying there and don't know if you're gonna live or die. And when I laid there and had no regrets and said to myself, I don't make it, it's all right with me. I knew that in my own heart, doesn't matter who believes what about me, I knew that I was being very sincere and that I was willing to die for this. I also said if I make it, I'm gonna be even more deliberate and careful to make sure that everything I do counts maximum.
Sharpton recovered and in 2004 ran in the race for President of the United States.
I always had this sense that no matter what good things or big things I've done, it will not equal the things I'm gonna do, which is why I don't sleep late, because I'm excited about what I'm gonna do that day.
Next are more true stories that show us when faith is your foundation, no mountain is too high, no valley too low.
One of the things that was clear in my family was that there was injustice in the world. And we talked about it, and we talked about how you overcome that, and you talked about struggling, and so all of it was around how you can make a difference in this world. And obviously, like any other black kid growing up in a segregated South, I absolutely hated any boundaries on me. I hated being told I couldn't do something or go anywhere, and so I don't remember a time when I was not dreaming about how one was going to change that and change injustice. My father, now the more and more I think about him, just extraordinary. I mean, he read, he thought, you know, he was clearly very much affected by the war, but he was also very much affected by his parents, and believed very deeply in family. He used to make me read with him every evening, and there were always books. And education was always there, but it was always education to give back and to leave the world better.
Her father was a pastor. He knew about service, service to God, service to church, family, and community. Before he died, he left his daughter Marian words of wisdom she never forgot.
I now know in retrospect that in some ways he prepared us. I mean, the Sunday he preached his last sermon, which is on the 139th Psalm, in a sense told us that he was going to die or go away, but we needn't be afraid, and there was no place you could go where God was not. And I remember running out of church and going up to his study and saying, "You're going to die." And he said, "It's okay, don't be afraid." And he was gone by the end of that week. But again, the courage and the preparation and the ability to say that God is here.
Marian Wright Edelman kept her father's words in her heart. She graduated from Yale University Law School and became the first African-American female admitted to the Mississippi Bar Association. She gained prominence as an advocate for Head Start and later served as president of the Children's Defense Fund. In 2000, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. She often credits her parents for her success.
They were always, both of them, keeping up on the latest literature. In my mother's case, it was church music or the latest things that were going on and with church women. But boy, I now understand that we were just extraordinarily blessed with two parents who were intelligent, who were committed, who believed in education, and who you know, shared that with the community. So people often ask, why did you do what you do? I said it never occurred to me not to do what I do, because that is the example that I saw day in and day out, serving the poor, trying to live the gospel. And they never let us down. They were always who we thought they were. They spoke the truth, they tried to live the truth, and you try to live up to those expectations.
My mother used to say, God watches over fools and babies. We never knew which ones we were, sometimes the fools, sometimes the babies. But he always was watching over us. When we got to LA, of course, we didn't have any money, and so we were taking the bus everywhere and bumming rides with our friends, like with Mom's friends. And so they sent me out on this commercial audition, and we had to take the bus. It seemed like it took forever to get there. when we got there, there were all of these little girls. And I didn't have any teeth in the front, you know, and I just felt like, oh my God, what am I doing here, you know? And Janet Jackson was there, and I just really thought, oh God, take me home now. I just thought, she's gonna get it. She's freaking Janet Jackson, Mom, let's go. Why are you making this so hard? And honey, my mother took me in the bathroom and she said, let me tell you something. Don't you let anyone or anything intimidate you. You go in there and you just do your best. All right. And I went in there and I did my best. And we went home and I'm still thinking, all right, yeah, fine, I did my best, but she's still Janet Jackson, so, you know. And by the time we'd gotten home, the agents and the casting directors had called and said that there was something wrong with either the tape or something that happened and I had to come back. Well, at that point, the buses had stopped running. So Mom, again, God watching over us, hitchhiked. And this guy, I think he was in a Porsche or something, he stopped, gave us a ride to this audition, and I got the job.
That job launched a career for Kim Fields. Before her 11th birthday, she was starring as Tootie in the hit show The Facts of Life. After graduating from college, Kim won a role next to Queen Latifah in the show Living Single. She continued to appear in popular sitcoms and films, but branched out into producing and directing. Fields is also the president of an entertainment company.
Every time I've gone into a meeting or a producer session or an audition or anything that puts me in that same kind of mode where I feel somewhat intimidated or a little anxious or anything like that, now I take myself into the bathroom and I have that same talk with myself. Don't be intimidated. Do your best, you know, and that has just always stuck with me.
I started working when I was 12 or 13. I just put my age up and got a job in Thompson's Restaurants in St. Louis, where I was a busgirl. I cleaned the tables. It was a segregated restaurant, and we had to eat our food in the basement. Every summer I had a job. I always worked, bought my clothes for the school year, and, you know, basically had what I needed for the entire school year from my work through the summer. Then I went to work in garment factories in St. Louis. You learn a lot about life working in those kinds of jobs. You learn a lot about people. You learn a lot about prejudices. You learn a lot about yourself. And I think it's that stage of your life where you're making lots of decisions about how you're going to relate to the world, what you're going to accept, what you're not going to accept, all of those things. I almost consider everything that happens to me a great learning experience. In my home coming up, I remember the social workers. We were on welfare much of the time that I was growing up. And the social workers who came to your house were always, you know, the professional that you got to see. And of course, you admired their clothes and the fact that they were educated. And, you know, they had a little power. They had the power to determine whether or not you eat, you know. So that's why I aspired to be a social worker.
Waters continued to get work wherever she could, but she never let go of her dream to be a social worker, even while raising a family of her own.
I always knew that I would go back to school. You just had to do that. As a matter of fact, every September, watching you know, people return to school was always something, it was a longing that I had while I was raising my children.
She finally made it to college, but she had to keep working to pay bills and tuition.
One of my dear friends who worked with me would visit me, and we would talk a lot about what was going on. And we started to talk about what we were reading in the papers about the war on poverty, and this wonderful program called Head Start, where poor kids were going to have the opportunity to have a preschool experience. I got hired as an aide in Head Start, and Head Start opened up for me a whole new way of thinking about who I was and all of the experiences that I had. I was able then to connect them to what I really wanted to be. And I was able to come to grips kind of with my philosophy of life. I mean, I was free. Don't forget, I was aspiring to be a social worker. And Head Start thrusts me into interaction with the parents with all of the problems of social work.
Maxine Waters also learned about politics.
We were still fighting for funding for Head Start because remember, the war on poverty, it started out pretty shaky. I mean, and the funding, and you had to fight for it. And so this brought me in touch with politicians. We started to see the politicians, and you got to know, kind of what their role was, and to kind of lie with them. And then, you met the people around them and would ask you to come work in their campaigns.
And that was only the beginning for Maxine Waters. She served 14 years in the California State Assembly, and then in 1992, she was elected to Congress. She's been there ever since. In 2002, she won her 7th term in the House of Representatives.
I still feel that at a very early age, I had a glimmer or glimpse into the possibilities. Didn't know where I was going and how I was going to get there, but never felt that I was not capable of doing something special, something important, and something that would be very satisfying.
Thank you for joining us for History Makers Talking Truth. We hope that the stories you've heard will encourage you to make a positive difference in your life and in the world. You can do it. Just remember, wherever you are in your life, have faith. I'm James Avery.